for you guys on Zoom, I personally love having all the cameras turned on. Now, if you're laying in bed and or just in your pajamas, maybe. Oh yeah. If you're laying in your pajamas, maybe not. But if you are at all in any kind of place where you can turn your camera on, I always personally love that. Hello, good morning. Because when you're teaching or you're going over anything, it's always nice to like see the people you're interacting with, particularly on a topic like this. And feel free to unmute yourself or anything like that. I'll try to monitor the chats. I'll try to monitor the chats if I can. I think I can. Let's see. I think I can open it up over here so I can kind of see. And I'll try to look down there. So if y'all have any like questions or comments or anything, I should see it come up in the chat because y'all are like right here in front of me. So that works. And good morning to you too. All right, so I've been excited about doing this class for a while because it's something that I had to go through and figure out myself to try to like get deeper in on what it is that my why was, because I got to a point in this career where I realized that what I thought was my why wasn't actually my why. And we talk a lot about it with KW in particular about what's your big why, what's our big why, what's our big why. And it's always fascinating to me because you see people come in and hello, good morning. Welcome back. I know, I like it. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on Zoom too. So yay, I'm glad. Somebody said, trust me, you want my camera off at this time. That's totally fine. I understand. But basically, KW talks a lot about our why and why it's so important. And what's your why and why are you doing this? And it's always interesting to me, and it's always been slightly frustrating to me, is that when you go to these conferences and you hear people talk about their why, they miss the mark. And it's like that you hear them and you put them through this filter of stuff that we're about to go through, and you realize like, that's not actually a why. And so I wanted to really make a class that's a lot higher accountability and digs more deep into like, what is that why? Like, what is the why? And realizing the importance of it and kind of harnessing that. So first thing, how many of you have questioned why you're doing this at some point in time?
Especially these days.
Yeah, especially these days, right? It can be a little hard, right? And how many of you have gotten to a point where it's like you want to achieve more, you want to do more, you want to accomplish more, but there's just kind of like not that motivation or that push to really do more, right? And so Denise has both hands up. And so, that happens to us frequently, particularly when we're wanting to get to a new level of something, because we're at something or we've been stagnant at a certain level. And then we're like, okay, I want to do more. I want to achieve more. But there's just like this almost ceiling that's kind of holding us back from achieving that. Now, how many of you think currently or have thought at some point that you kind of have a why? Very wishy-washy on most of it. Okay. So that's the whole reason why we're here, is to solidify that and get that foundation. So what makes a why so important? Does anybody have any guesses or comments about like why is that why so important? Motivation, yeah. Motivation. What else? Anybody else? Hi, good morning.
It's your direction.
Yeah, it's direction. Yeah, it's the direction that you take your life. It's where you want to go.
It's the root of why you're doing what you're doing every day, why you get out of bed and why you keep pushing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so fundamental to what we're doing. Now, the reason your why is so critically central to everything that you do is because it is literally the same to our life as a foundation is to a building. Now, think about that a little bit more. You can have a structure that doesn't necessarily have a strong foundation. And it'll stand for a period of time, right? But how do you know? What is the test? What happens when something doesn't have a strong foundation? The minute that pressure is applied to that, it starts to fall apart. And that's where a why comes in, is because people think they have a why. You'll think that, oh, okay, well, I have a clear idea. I have a good, clear, things are going good right now. Things are going fine right now. But the moment that there is high pressure, good morning, Don. The moment that there is a moment of high pressure, everything starts to fail. And it's because you have that lack of a why. It's the same as a building or a structure failing under pressure. It's like the same thing where they see, like, they build this brand new bridge and they have this gorgeous new thing, or some kind of statue, or a lot of times we see it with bridges or pedestrian walkovers, where it's like they spend all this money building this thing, and then they realize, they open it, cracks start to show up, and then shortly thereafter it just falls apart. And it's because it was great by itself, but the moment that pressure started building on top of it, they realized how weak that it actually was. And that's why the why is so critically important to everything that we do, is because that why in your life is just the same as a foundation and a structural soundness is to a building or a structure. So how many of you have felt that before, where you've been in a place where it's like, okay, things are kind of going good. Things are, yeah, all right, things are good. But then the moment of high pressure, everything feels like it kind of falls apart. That is almost always attributed to a lack or a weakened why, because it's just like the foundation not being there and not being solid. So how can we start to figure out what our big why is, right? Like, where do you start? Because it seems like this very large kind of task of sorts of like, well, what is the why? And then we kind of get close to it and it's like, yeah, okay, that's good enough. And we'll let it slide and be like, okay, that's our why, that's fine. But again, then you realize it's not a why when you start exerting pressure on it. So how do we start figuring out what the why is? How do we start stripping all that down and start figuring out what the why is? Well, first thing, you have to kind of stop and pause and start with the subconscious of our mind. It goes beyond mindset, because the reality is mindset is the byproduct of your subconscious mind. So if you just say, okay, we had to fix your mindset, you had to change your mindset. We hear that all the time. Okay, great. Yeah, mindset, whatever. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'll change my mindset. So then the more, you wake up and go like, I'm going to be great today. And it's very half-hearted and very, not emotional. It's like, sure, I'm on the process of fixing my mindset. It's like, no, you're not. No, that's just because you say something doesn't necessarily mean it has any correlation to your subconscious. And the thing is it's very difficult to go upstream, right? Because if you try to start like, okay, here's what I think my why is, and then I'll let that kind of fix my, fix my mindset, and then I'll allow my mindset to fix the subconscious, you're going at it in the wrong direction. Because you have to start with the subconscious, because when you start focusing on that subconscious part of your brain, that's what will ultimately determine your mindset. And then your mindset can strengthen and give purpose to your why. Do you see how that works? So the reason it's important is because we have so many things that we've gone through and that we do in our life that have built up and things that we kind of just shove into the back of our mind and we just kind of keep in the shadows, right? The problem with that is that we can't fix what's left in the dark. You can't fix what's in the dark. You can only fix something and begin to address something when it's brought out into the light. And that's why you have to start there, because you have to bring it out of those shadows. You have to bring it out of the dark so you can enable yourself to start working on that. So there are 6 core realizations that I want you to think about when it comes to your subconscious. So I want you to write these down. So there are 6 things that you really need to focus on, okay? Give you a second to get some stuff out. Let me see. We've had more people join us on. Okay. I'll wait for you to come back. You are so welcome. Give us just a second. We'll wait for Holly to come back. We'll start talking about what these 6 things are. Is everybody having a good morning? Did everybody survive the storms last night? I tend to sleep through everything anyway, so I really wouldn't know if a tornado ripped right by my house, but I don't think that we got anything severe from what I knew.
It was a big wah, wah, wah.
I figured as much. That's kind of what I thought.
Well, I'm happy because last time I woke up, power went out.
Oh, shit.
Blew,
Really?
Yeah. Fireworks outside my house.
4th of July. Yeah. All right. So here are the 6 core things that I've pretty much identified as the subconscious drivers and what we need to tell ourselves and address with our subconscious, saying like, hey, this is the reality of it, right? So the first thing is you have to realize your story is not your prison. Your story is your power. Your story is not your prison. Your story is your power. Every single one of us has a story. Every single one of us has a story. And I refer to it as just our circumstances, because we all have circumstances. There have all been circumstances that we've gone through in our life that have put us to where we are now. And it's just part of our story. And too many of us fall victim to our circumstances. We allow ourselves to be victimized by our own story. And Kay Evans asked me probably about a year and a half ago, she asked me, what did I think the definition of success was? And of course, when Kay Evans asks you something like that, you're like, well, I better have a good answer. But she asked me, what did I think the definition of success was? And the best I could come up with, and I've tested it in a lot of different scenarios now, and I think it's true, is that the difference between somebody who is truly successful and the difference between people who are not as successful as they should be or could be is their willingness and their choice to be victimized by their own circumstances. If you make a complete and total decision that you are not going to be victimized by your story, that you are not going to be victimized by your circumstances, then you can begin to take the steps to getting on the other side of that and really truly harnessing your power in this. And the reason I say circumstances is because I was telling somebody who was with a different brokerage, one of my friends, he was complaining about how he feels like he can never really do anything in this business, and he just, a lot of excuses. And I told him a little bit about my story, which y'all will hear more about throughout the course of the class. But to sum it up, it sounds like a country song. So if I had a dog, it would have died, but I didn't have a dog. So, that's kind of the earmark, the short version of my story. So I was telling him, and I was like, you had to harness this. And he told me, he said, well, I wish that I had a story like you, because I was raised in a very protective household. We had a lot of money, and I never had to work for anything, and there was never any kind of like failure. And he's like, I wish at some point somebody had let me fail so I could have a story like you had. And I told him, I said, well, your circumstances are your circumstances, and you either choose to be a victim to those circumstances or you choose not to be a victim to those circumstances. We all have circumstances, and they're all different for each one of us. And that's the key, is that you have to make a choice that you're not going to be victimized by your circumstances, whatever those are. You don't have to have a big sad story to have a victimization to what your circumstances are. Maybe your circumstances that you feel victimized by is the fact that you don't feel like you have that much of a story. But that's still just as much of a circumstance as anybody else, right? It's the same kind of concept that where people say, oh my God, she's making such a big deal out of it. It was just her cat that died. Like, why is it that big of a deal? It is relative to the person. For that person whose cat died, if she had no other family and there was no one else around in her life, that may affect her just the same as somebody else losing a very close loved one. You can't compare one person's circumstances to somebody else's circumstances. It's relative to the person. So the biggest differentiating factor between people who tend to be more successful and people who tend to not be as successful is their willing choice to stop being victimized by their story. Your story is not your prison. Your story is your power. Your story gives you the power. So the second stop, or the second place, second point, stop putting yourself in positions that are killing you. Stop putting yourself in positions that are killing you. Every single one of us end up looking around and going like, oh shit, I'm back here again. Another position that's killing me in one way or the other that I am right back in again. And we tend to have these toxic circumstances and toxic positions that we tend to slide back into from time to time. Whether it be a mindset, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a bad habit. We all find ourselves at certain points in our life in positions that are killing us. So you have to stop putting yourself in positions that are killing you. The problem is, and what leads us to fall back into these circumstances are two things. One, we don't have something to replace it. We don't have something to replace it. Or two, that the pain of being in that place is not greater than the fear of leaving it. It's a comfort zone. It's a comfort zone. Your comfort zone is very frequently a position that we find ourselves in that ends up killing us slowly. And while we're on the topic of a comfort zone, through a lot of trial and error, I realized that the comfort zone actually doesn't really exist. It's not a place. It's not a physical place, because somebody says, oh, my home is my comfort zone. Well, what happens if you move? Oh, your new house becomes your comfort zone. So I guess your comfort zone was never that house in the first place.
You sound like Brian Buffini, buddy.
Hey, I love that man, so I take that as a big compliment.
Absolutely.
Your comfort zone isn't a stagnant place. It's something you bring with you. Because I got to a place in my life where after I graduated high school, I didn't go straight into college. And I took a year off because I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. But what happened in that time was that I realized that my world had started shrinking without my acknowledgement. And that happens frequently, is that the shrinking of our world happens without us even being hyper aware of it. And I wasn't realizing that by being home every single day, almost every day, not having a job, not going to school, not having a purpose, my whole world was shrinking around me. And what happens is that we don't realize it until all of a sudden we try to do something that's outside of our world, and it is like running full speed into a glass door. And you go like, holy shit, that was not there before. Why am I feeling like that? That was not there the last time I did that. And it happens when our world starts to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And we find ourselves in this place that we think is our comfort zone. And it's actually a position in our life that's killing us. And so I got to where I was a complete agoraphobic. Does anybody know what agoraphobic is? Agoraphobia? Jim, you know what it is? It's the fear of just leaving your house. It's what Paula Dean had, what made her start her catering company. That's why she started selling things out of her house. And she would cater events, but people would have to actually physically come to her house to pick everything up because she literally was scared to leave her house. I ended up in the same position, which surprises a lot of people because it's not my personality type. Because it's not. But I found myself in a position that was killing me because there was an innate lack of purpose and a sense of direction and a why in my life. And I had allowed my world to shrink so much that even walking to the end of my driveway, granted it was a long driveway, so it's like, 400 or 500 feet, so it was a long distance. But even walking to the end of my own driveway started triggering a panic attack. And I knew that that was so wrong and that that was not how life had been, but it was right then. I had allowed circumstances in my life and I had allowed toxic positions in my life to bring me to a place where I was being a complete victim to all these circumstances. And I was literally scared to just leave my house. And so what I did, which I have found to be really a core factor in success and doing anything that you want to accomplish in your life, was that every single day I walked to the end of my mailbox and I picked an obstacle farther down the road that I was going to walk to tomorrow. Not right in that moment, because that would have been overwhelming and like, no, I can't do that. But what I kept saying to myself is I could get to this point, and if I can get here, I can get there. If I can stand here, then I can walk down 2 or 3 mailboxes to my neighbor's house, and I'll do that tomorrow. All of a sudden, that started developing a small sense of purpose in my life because I already had a goal that I was going to accomplish that next day. So the next day I woke up, I was like, I know I'm going to walk to that mailbox. And it sounds stupid and pathetic. It's like, oh, that was a big struggle to walk to like 2 mailboxes down. But at the time it was. And we all end up in these positions in our life where it's like we tell ourselves like, oh, this is stupid. This is so dumb. I can't believe I'm doing this. But it affects us just the same. It may have been 2 mailboxes to the big scheme of things, but to me, it was much bigger than that. And so the next day I would walk to that 2nd or 3rd mailbox, and then I'd pick another obstacle. Be like, okay, I want to walk to that intersection tomorrow. So the next day I'd wake up and say, okay, that intersection is next. And then I started walking to that intersection. And then from that intersection, I'd see something else that I didn't see the days before. And say, well, if I can get here, I can get there. And that's how it all started. And so then once I finally got a job and I started back at school, I kept continuing to push those boundaries and I kept continuing to push that envelope. And so I decided, I was like, I want to take a trip by myself. And so the first thing I did is I took a trip down to Amelia Island. Now, granted, it was at a Ritz-Carlton, so yes, it was a big task for me to do that. I'm nothing if not, very honorable person. And so I was like, I'll go to the Ritz-Carlton, right? But I went with my car and I drove there because that was my escape, right? Should anything hit the fan while I was there, I had an escape. I had my car, so I could go on this trip by myself, and I might not have known anyone there, but at least I had my car, so I had an escape route, right? So that was step 1. And what happened is that while I was there, it was amazing. All of a sudden, my focus wasn't all on me or the person that I was with. It was on everything going on around me. And I started interacting with people that I would have never interacted with otherwise. I made really great friends with the front desk girl at the Ritz. We're still friends on Facebook. As a matter of fact, she just got a job at the Four Seasons last week. I saw on Facebook. This was years ago. But we just started developing a relationship and we just started talking and we became friends. That would have never happened had I not been in that place. And then I drove home and I realized I felt totally comfortable there. So what was the comfort zone? Was it my car? Because that was the one thing that I brought with me. So then the next step, the next mailbox beyond that was, okay, now I wanted to fly by myself, where I didn't have a car. I didn't have an escape route. I didn't have somewhere to run away to, but I was going to a place where I knew the people that I was going to go see. So I flew there alone. The trip was by myself, but at least I knew people there and I had a place to stay and I was familiar with them. So that was the next step. Now, of course, I decided to fly out in the afternoon. And so by the time I got on the plane, it was dark. And so we're charging down the runway in the middle of the dark. And then it occurred to me, holy shit, I've flown a lot before, but I've never flown completely by myself. And so then, of course, you have those toxic tenets in your mind and that toxic verbiage that you say to yourself. And then, of course, the first thing that I thought when we were going down this runway and I'm by myself, I was like, well, there you go. This is the first time I've flown by myself. So this is going to be the plane that crashes. 100%. Because I am alone, this is the one that's going down. Period. End of story. That's how it works. And what happens, we landed, I got off the plane, and we all have done these things where we get on the other side of our fear, and then all of a sudden we think, oh God, that was so stupid. And then you're like, yeah, I am a boss. Like, I just flew across the world. What's next? Like, put me on a plane to London. I'm good. I don't need anybody else, right? There's this sense of empowerment that came from that. And so then the next thing is I went there, had fun with my friends, did all that stuff, flew back, and I was like, awesome. So what was the next step? So the next step beyond that was I took a trip to Dallas, Texas. I flew out there by myself. I did not know a single soul in Dallas, period, much less where I was going. And I decided to go to a conference, a Buffini conference, funny enough. And I rented a hotel by myself. I rented a car by myself. And the whole time I was completely by myself. You know what ended up happening? If y'all have been following me on social media at all, and for those of you who didn't see this or haven't been following me on social media, last summer I went on a road trip with my best friend, Ben, and we covered 5,000 miles, 12 states, all camping, and it was like 3 weeks worth. I met him at that conference. I would have never met him had I not been in that circumstance. I met him because I was by myself and I was wandering around the aisles looking for a place to sit, and there was one seat available right behind him. And all of a sudden I started realizing, just by the way he was interacting with the people he was with, we started cutting up and joking. Fast forward, he's like the best friend that I have. And we literally, I was in Colorado visiting him earlier this year in January. He's flying out here in May because we're doing a camping trip off the coast of Georgia. I would have never had that had I stayed in what I thought was my comfort zone. And I realized at that point that the comfort zone is just like your clothes. It's something you put on every single day and you bring with you. It's not a place. It's not something stagnant. It's a feeling. It's a mindset. Your comfort zone is something you bring with you. And the only way to really truly find that is by continually pushing that envelope, getting yourself out of these toxic positions we find ourselves backsliding into. Because what's going to happen, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to get so complacent with that toxic position you're in that you dull everything else out, and then you wake up one morning and you realize that you haven't lived a life by your decisions. You've lived a life purely by the circumstances set around you. Or you're going to realize one day that the pain of staying there is greater than the fear of leaving it. And a lot of people have been in relationships where they feel like, yes, we acknowledge that the relationship is toxic. I acknowledge that where I am isn't great and healthy, but the fear of leaving it is greater than the pain of staying in it. And the moment that that pendulum shifts to where the pain of staying there is greater than the fear of leaving, or you make a decision to leave, it's when you can get out from underneath those toxic positions. Which brings me to the third thing. You have to learn the difference between a decisions, statements, and excuses. You have to learn the difference between decisions, statements, and excuses.
Will you say that again, Eric? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. You have to learn the differences between decisions, statements, and excuses. Now let's break this down a little bit. What do you think the biggest differentiating factor between a decision and a statement is? There's one single thing that separates a decision and a statement. Does anybody want to take a stab at it? Dawn?
Action.
You've heard me say this before. It's action. Think about it. The difference between a decision and a statement is just the action that goes behind it. How many times have you heard somebody say, I am deciding right now that I'm going to start going to the gym and eating healthy? I am deciding that I am going to be healthy and that I'm going to go to the gym, right? You are making a decision. The problem is none of your actions support the decision, which means you never made a decision in the first place. You just made a statement. If your decisions are never backed up with action, you've never made a decision. You just made a statement. Whereas the byproduct is if you make a statement and your action supports that statement, that becomes the decision, whether you know it or not. How many times have you made a statement that has inadvertently turned into a decision that you didn't even know about? And how many times have you made a decision that's ultimately just been nothing more than a statement? To really harness your power, you have to figure out the difference between making a decision and making a statement. That's why you'll hear me say, like I said earlier, the difference between people who are successful and not successful are the ones who make a decision not to be victimized by their circumstances. It's a decision. I didn't say the ones who made a statement. I said the ones who made a decision. Okay? Now, when we talk about excuses, do you know what an excuse is? Excuses only come from failed commitments. Excuses only come from failed commitments.
This is a Sunday sermon, okay?
Look, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, okay? Look, I'm telling you what. I grew up down here in the South. This is how I communicate, right? You know, this is what I do. And I can do this because it's stuff that I feel powerful and strongly about because I've been there. I can't talk about stuff that I haven't done, right? All of this comes from experience. I can't talk about stuff that I haven't done or feel passionate about, right? Because God knows if you want to talk to me about, like, I don't know, good Lord, like physics or math, you're going to be met with a very vacant stare and not much communication back with you, because let me tell you, there is not much effort there. There is not much experience there. So there is not much passion there. I'm talking about this stuff because it's what I feel so strongly about, because it's stuff that I've been through and I've seen firsthand and I've discovered and I've lived through. That's why I talk about it. But excuses only come from failed commitments. Commitments to yourself or commitments to others. So think about that for a minute. When is the last time that you made an excuse to yourself because you failed a commitment to yourself? Commitments only come from failed excuses. Or I'm sorry, excuses only come from failed commitments. I mean, think about it. Can you think of a scenario where you've made an excuse that it wasn't a byproduct of failing some kind of commitment that you made? So you have to learn the differences between decisions and statements and excuses. If you can truly understand those three things and where they come from and the differences between the three of them, you can really start to increase your level of accountability with yourself. So the fourth thing, figure out which toxic tenants you need to evict from your mind. Figure out which toxic tenants you need to evict from your mind. Our mind is nothing but rentable space. Anytime we allow something or someone to occupy space in our mind, we are allowing them to be a tenant and rent space. But guess what? At the end of the day, you are the landlord. And you have the power to evict those people who are tenants in your mind. If something or someone is occupying rental space in your mind and they are not truly there to serve you, you need to write up an eviction notice and staple that shit to their door. And tell them, this mind does not belong to you. This mind does not belong to you. This space does not belong to you. When somebody is getting evicted, you're saying this space, this house, this room does not belong to you anymore. So what toxic tenants are you allowing to occupy space in your mind that you need to serve an eviction notice to? So take a second. I want you to write down 2 toxic tenants that you know for a fact are occupying space in your mind that you need to serve an eviction notice to. You'll have a pretty good idea of what your top 2 toxic tenants are. Now, it may sound corny and it may sound cheesy, but I'm all about the corny and cheesy because you know what? At the end of the day, sometimes it works. So what I encourage you to do is go home later and type up an eviction notice to those 2 tenants and tell them in black and white, type it out, write it out. Dear,
Does that have to be a person?
no. It can be a habit. It can be a thought. It can be an insecurity.
Okay.
Anything that occupies rental space in your mind that is not going to serve you can be evicted.
Right.
It doesn't have to be just a person. It can be a mindset, an insecurity. So I encourage you to go home, look up what eviction notices look like and say, dear so-and-so, dear whatever it is, you are no longer allowed to occupy any further space. You do not belong here. This mind, this space does not belong to you anymore. And this serves as your eviction notice. And keep it with you, because when you feel that thing, that person, that insecurity, that space coming back and wanting to sneak in the back door, pull out that eviction notice again and remind yourself that no, you can't submit a new application. You already been evicted. And you're not coming back. So figure out what toxic tenants you need to evict. Number 5, identify your silent drivers. Identify your silent drivers. Now, I know you may be wondering what in the hell that means, but I'm about to tell you. You have to identify your silent drivers. Like I said earlier, every single one of us have things that collect in the recesses of our subconscious. We all have things that have happened to us in our life that color our world and make decisions on our behalf. I call these things silent drivers. The reason I call them silent drivers is because I'm an analogy person. I'm a visual person. So I always like having things have a visual representation. And the reason I call them silent drivers is because it is like driving a car with invisible hands gripping onto the steering wheel and just ever so slightly pulling that steering wheel. Happens to all of us. And it's the answer to why we can set out with a destination and have 9 lanes of traffic. And then before you realize it, you're in a totally different lane. And you don't remember pulling the steering wheel. It's because you didn't consciously pull the steering wheel. One of your silent drivers had this invisible hand on that steering wheel and started pulling that steering wheel out of alignment. Now, the problem is these silent drivers are frequently the collections of pain, comments, hurt that have collected along the way that we allow to subconsciously drive that car. And the thing is, you basically have 2 options. And the first option, which I see so many people do, is you try to ignore the silent drivers. And you can almost feel that somebody is in the passenger seat with you, but you're too scared to turn around and look and see who that is or what that is sitting in the passenger seat. And so you try to ignore it. So your version of ignoring it is to just focus harder on the road. And so you go like, if I just focus harder on the road and just look at the lanes more, then I can keep myself more in the lanes. The problem is, by continuing to ignore the person in the passenger seat of the car with you gives them more control because they know that you're ignoring them to a higher level. And so they can pull a little harder. And then you start focusing harder on the lanes, and then you start drifting even more. And then you try to autocorrect, and then you pull the steering wheel back, and then you start swerving. And then all of a sudden you're in a place where it feels like everything is like, what in the hell? Who is driving this car? Like, I feel like I'm driving the car, but then again, I feel like I'm not driving this car at all. And so then you have to push on the brakes and then come to a full stop and then reset and go like, okay, let's try this again. I'm starting in this lane, lane 1. And the problem is it's going to happen again and again and again and again, because you have these silent drivers, these invisible hands that have a hand on your steering wheel that are just ever so slightly pulling you out of alignment and pulling you into another lane. And it's how people end up in places that they never meant or decided or wanted to be in the first place. It's how that happens, is because of these silent drivers. They collect over time. So the second option, what you need to be doing, is you have to pull that car over and stop and look in the passenger seat and figure out, who is it? What is it that is silently driving this car? Who are my silent drivers? What are these things that I am allowing to have a hand on the steering wheel? And they're slightly different than one of the toxic tenets. Now, can they be somewhat similar? Yes, but they're different. Because, for example, a toxic tenet can be a relationship, a mindset, and insecurity, right? A silent driver can be something somebody said to you once that you've held in the back of your mind that you allow to color your world. A silent driver can be an experience that you saw a family member go through that, without you knowing, you're subconsciously trying to avoid. For example, I didn't even realize it, but I had a silent driver when it came to working out and being healthy and being fit. And I wasn't even aware of it. But what had happened was, every time I started like really going down the path of like, okay, I'm starting to get in shape and I'm starting to do all this good. Yeah, okay. I would start to veer away from it. All of a sudden, that silent driver had its hand on the steering wheel and started pulling me out of alignment. It wasn't a toxic tenet. It wasn't something overt. It's just a small, invisible hand that was just pulling the steering wheel. And I realized what it was by pulling over the car and stopping and just going like, okay, let's break this down. Why in the hell is that happening? I realized that it had a direct correlation to that when my mom was 18 years old, she was super healthy. She did like track and all these different things. She was busting ass on an exercise bike and got a brain hemorrhage. She was in a coma for 2.5 weeks because of a brain hemorrhage. Now, you can't necessarily correlate that happened because she was on the exercise bike. People have had brain hemorrhages just driving down the road. Now, she survived, obviously, and everything was a miraculous healing. There's no rhyme or reason to why the blood vessels found each other and fused back together, but they did. But what I wasn't aware of, though, is that my whole life I was using that as a silent driver, that every time I'd start getting down a path where it's like, yeah, okay, I really want to get in shape, I really want to do this, there was a silent driver that had that little invisible hand on my steering wheel going like, be careful. You don't want to go, because look what happened to Mom. But do you think that really, truly has any relation to me and my physical health? No. I was a freak accident. It may not have had anything to do with her being in that space. But the difference is, as I was allowing it to be an invisible hand on my steering wheel, steering me away from a goal that I kept setting out to achieve. So you have got to go back through your history. You have to go back through the back recesses of the dark parts of your mind. And yes, it might be painful. Yes, it'll probably be uncomfortable, but that's the point. But you have to figure out what those silent drivers are. Like I said, they can be a collection of all kinds of things. They can be something mean that somebody told you. I think most people, I would venture to say that I think it is impossible to even get through high school, much less the rest of your life, without hearing really awful things that were said to you, about you, and in your direction. I had an eighth grade teacher tell me that I would probably never graduate anywhere and probably never succeed at pretty much anything. It's like, thanks. Right? I had my dad tell me when I was a kid, he said, oh yeah, I have no doubt you'll probably make $1 million one day. He's like, but you'll also probably lose it all. These are the little things that collect over time that have invisible hands on your steering wheel. And why it's so important to identify them is because if you identify them, those hands aren't invisible anymore. And when you're looking at the road and you're heading down that lane and you start to see yourself drift, you can look down and quickly figure out which hand it is that's pulling that steering wheel. And if you know which hand it is that's pulling the steering wheel, that will allow you to go back and auto-correct yourself and gently pull that steering wheel back in alignment to keep you on your goals and keep you on your track. And how do you figure out the silent drivers? The problem is that it's different for everybody. You just have to go through. And what I always find is that you can't necessarily sit down in one setting and say, okay, I'm going to figure out what all my silent drivers are. That's going to be hard when you're not behind the wheel. You're going to identify the silent drivers when you're setting out to accomplish something and you feel, you're aware and you feel something is slightly pulling you out of alignment. When that happens, that moment is when you have to stop and assess and figure out, wait a minute, what is that? Where is that coming from? And why is that there? Does that make sense? So number 6, you need to figure out what success looks like to you. Figure out what success looks like to you. Notice how I didn't say, what does success look like on a global scale? I'm not asking you what success globally looks like. I'm asking you what success personally looks like. So I want you to take a second and think about that. What does success look like to you? What are the earmarks of your own personal success? I'm not talking about accomplishments, because accomplishments are different. Accomplishments are something that you get on the road to being successful. Do you hear the difference there? Accomplishments are not success. Accomplishments are byproducts of heading towards success. I didn't have that written down, so I'm going to write that down for myself so I can reference back to that again. So I want you to take a second and think about, what does that look like? What does personal success for Holly look like? What does personal success for Jim look like? And just jot down a couple of things that would be a personal success to you. just some fuel for thought here. Personal success can be things like personality traits. Right? Personal success can look like not being afraid of blank. Personal success doesn't have to be a finite thing. While y'all are doing that, I'm going to run to the bathroom because sitting in this chair, I realized I didn't go to the bathroom before we started this class. So I will be right back. Yeah, or if you want to take a little break and get coffee or take a pee break, something like that, go for it. But I want you to think about, really think about in the back of your head, what does personal success look like? Not what does success look like globally, what does success look like personally?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as soon as you go through that door right over there.
Yeah, and I was about to, but she had the whole like cleaning cart. I was gonna like move the cleaning cart, so it's like, okay, fine, I'll just walk around. Okay, I'm back. I know y'all are very concerned, but I feel so much better. All right.
We're flushing some toxic tenants.
Yes, exactly. I was flushing away toxic tenants, 100%. That's exactly right. All right. Now, I'm not sure on Zoom if everybody is back yet or not, but we're back in person. So, all right. So, to just summarize, the 6 core factors here, the 6 core realizations that we have to figure out. Realize that your story is not your prison. Your story is your power. Stop putting yourself in positions that are killing you. Learn the differences between decisions, statements, and excuses. Figure out which toxic tenants you need to evict. Identify your silent drivers. And figure out what success looks like to you. Got it? So, you may be wondering where I learned all this and where I came up with all of this and why this all came to fruition. And like I said earlier, it's because I've had to struggle with this and I've been in all these places, and I'm just one of those people that I am like a Mr. Fix-It. So anytime in my life I've ever come up against something that I'm like, I don't get that, no matter what it is, I am one of those deep dive 2 a.m. Google searchers. Like if I was wondering one day about how like the functionality of like dams, right? Before I knew it, it was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm like way down this rabbit hole to like the earliest forms of like why dams work, what they do, how they operate, what their role is, all these things, because I'm just like, that's how my brain works. And so anytime in my life that I've gotten to a place where I'm like, that doesn't make sense, or I need to know more about that, I've taken that and been like, okay, I need to figure this out. So that's where all this came from. But this specifically, talking about the why, came from my journey in real estate. And it's because, for one, my introduction to real estate was, you could say, pretty damn rough. My first year in real estate, I made $2,000 gross. So if you made more than $2,000 gross your first year, you kicked my ass. There is a point, I realized, that the IRS just goes like, you're fine. Just keep it. Because you need it worse than us. You know it's a desperate state of affairs when you're actually praying that you get to a place where you can even make enough to file taxes. I was like, man, I don't even know what it's like to even file taxes because I don't even make enough. But what happened was that I started thinking, I was like, okay, I had to come to Jesus meeting on the edge of my bed. And I was like, I need to figure this out, because my kind of track record in a lot of ways is just a long road of multiple recurring failings. Failing and failing and failing and failing and failing and failing and failing. But they say failure is a great teacher, which is why I like to think I'm a really good teacher, because I've failed enough for 10 people. So when we talk about failing and its byproduct, you have to remember that you can fail and not be a failure. Did you know that you can do something and not become that thing? You can do something and not become that thing. You can fail and not be a failure. There's a difference. I like to think that to fail is just a thing, right? You just, oh, I failed. Being a failure is succumbing to it. So you can do something and not be something. You can get drunk and not be a drunk. So you have to remember that you can do things and not become them. And if you've done things that you aren't proud of or that you don't like, and you've failed or you've had experiences that you're like, oh, I don't like that, let yourself off the hook, because it does not define who you are, because you can do something and not become that thing. So it's pretty much my whole life in a short story, because I failed one class my senior year of high school. And so I had to take summer school. So I never walked at my high school graduation. My diploma was mailed to me. I started doing a business. I started doing graphic design, marketing, advertising, and I did that for about a year. I was like, yeah, I can't do that. Got rid of the whole thing. I had a job as an assistant manager and a personal banker at SunTrust. And I was fired. I was going to school for marketing, and then I was kicked out. 2.5, 3 years into college, I got a nice little letter from the college saying, it's not us, it's you. Don't come back. Yeah. Then shortly thereafter, I got my car repossessed. Like I said, country song, had I had a dog, it would have died. Period. End of story. And I was telling that story to an Ignite class a couple of years ago. And they said, oh, so that's like how you flowed yourself? You repossessed cars like you were a repo guy? And I was like, no, I was on the receiving end of the repo, or the giving end, depending on how you look at it. And then I got into real estate and I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. Made $2,000 all year long. And going back to the silent driver things, like I said, it's things that people say to you sometimes. Sometimes those things can become your fuel, because when my car got repossessed, my mom was a single mom. She was a teacher. She didn't have any money to do anything. My car payments were $257 a month. But it might as well have been $2,575,000, because it just wasn't there. And so I called my dad and I asked my dad, I was like, well, I had been asking him for a car payment, just one, for like 2 or 3 months. And if anybody has ever been close to repossessing their car, you'll know this, or getting their car repossessed, you'll know this. I was playing like musical neighborhoods with my car. Like any friend that I knew that lived in like a gated neighborhood, I was like, hey, you mind if I go park my car there for like a day or two? Just, trying to see different things, keep the tag and license plate moving. I almost got to a place where I was trying to take the license plate off of my own car so that they couldn't identify it. So I got a part-time job, and I woke up day one on the job, and my car was gone. They had repossessed my car the morning I was starting a new job. And so I had to call my dad, and I was like, well, like the fortune was told to you, the car's gone. And I said, now it's like a whole different thing. My dad got mad at me and started yelling at me and told me that if I had a better work ethic, that it would have never happened to me in the first place, and hung up. It was such an indication that he was so disconnected that he didn't really know what was going on. And so it's like, okay, clearly I have to do everything myself. So I got into real estate, and I really started like beating the pavement. And after making $2,000 all year long, I sat down at the edge of my bed and had a come to Jesus meeting. And I was like, okay, I thought this was the direction I was supposed to go in, right? I grew up loving houses, building things. I wanted to be in architecture. I did like marketing and advertising stuff for a time. So it's like, it's a combination of everything that I love, right? It's a little bit of marketing, a lot of houses, you know, you get to play in the little bit of a design world kind of thing there. It was like perfect. And it's social. I like being around people. It was like the perfect thing. But I'm sitting there on the edge of my bed going like, I don't know if there was like a bolt missing from the exit sign that had flipped it upside down and was pointing in a different direction than I thought it was supposed to be pointing in, but this does not feel right. And so I had to have this come to Jesus meeting. And Dawn, I'm not sure if you're still on or not, but like Dawn said, it's like, you know, the Baptist thing, it was like a church thing, right? I was like, I had to have a come to Jesus meeting, an intervention with myself. And so it's like, what? And this is where I want you to, this is what I want you to do with your minds when you think about this stuff. When you go back and think about this class, and you go back and think about all the things that we've talked about, I want you to remove all of the limitations on your thinking. You may not be able to remove all the limitations in real life, but you can remove all the limitations when you think about something. So what I did was I was like, okay, let's just take all of the limitations off, right? What is it that I genuinely want to do? I was like, well, because it's almost like a very calm, rational self sat next to me. And so I'm like having a conversation with myself. The problem is that person was far more sarcastic and much more dry than I was. So it's like, you know, I want to like figure this out. Like, what do I want to do? It's like, well, I wanted to do real estate, but you're not doing that very well, are you? It's like, so I was like, okay, all things aside, I want to do real estate. That's what I genuinely want to do. And it was to a point where I was like, okay, if that's genuinely what I want to do, then you might as well do it. What does it take to accomplish that goal, right? What does that look like? What does that work look like? What do you have to do to make it happen? Because the reality was, I didn't have a lot of options to fall back on. Let's see, I was fired from my last job. I don't have a college degree. I barely had a college or high school diploma. Quit the job that I had just before that. That was a part-time job. So my resume looked pretty much like a single cover letter with nothing behind it. This is my name. This is where to find me. That's my contact information. Let me know if you have any further questions. So, you know, there was nothing there. I didn't have a lot of fallbacks. And so that's the beauty of failing sometimes, though, is that when you fail time and time and time and time again, you realize that it's survivable, that it's not that big a deal. When you've been at failure's doorstep time after time after time after time, it starts just becoming something that's like, oh, okay, here again? All right, well, bye. I'll be back again when I try something else that ends up failing. But when you lose that sting of failing, it enables you and gives you the permission to start trying on a grander level. And it allows you to start playing on a bigger playing field because you allow yourself to start setting bigger and bigger goals because you know basically what the worst case scenario looks like. I think a huge factor of why I've been able to be successful is because I know what the other side looks like. So what happens if I try something and I fail? What happens if all of this goes to hell? What happens if I have to completely start over again from scratch, right? What happens if I get my car repossessed? Been there, done that. And I survived. And I was still able to be successful in spite of it, which means that I can do it again. And that gives me the power to get on the other side of fear because I know what it's like. And I know that it's really, in the big scheme of things, not that big a deal. And sometimes the people who are the most scared of failure are the ones who have never truly failed at something before. Show me a CEO or a high-level executive, or show me some big business owner who does not have a long line of fails behind them. And I truly believe that they have a correlation, because the bigger somebody fails, the bigger they're able to dream. Because they know that even if they do fail, they know what it looks like, they know what it feels like, and they know that it's not the end of the world. And they know that you can fail and not be a failure. So what ended up happening was I made a decision. I made a decision to make this real estate thing work. Because like, this is ultimately, with no confinements, this is truly what I wanted to do. And if it is truly something that you genuinely want to do, then you have to sit down and go like, okay, then what is it going to take? So I found an agent in the office who had more leads than they knew what to do with. They were subscribing to RedX and had spreadsheets of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of names and numbers. And so what I did is I got a job valeting cars in Buckhead. Now keep in mind, this whole time I'm living at home at my mama's house in Marietta. And so what ended up happening is that for 6 months, I woke up at 7:30 o'clock in the morning at mom's house. I was here in the office by 8, and I was making 400 to 500 phone calls a day. And then I would change clothes in the office bathroom, drove down to Buckhead, valeted cars until 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, drove back to Marietta to mom's house, got as much sleep as I could, and then was right back here again at 8 a.m. the next morning. Because my vision for where I wanted, the pain of staying where I was greater than the fear of really going for it. And I knew that at that point, even if I failed, I knew what that looked like anyways, so you might as well try. So after 6 months of doing this, I started getting some ground underneath me, right? And there was an interesting experience that happened while I was valeting cars one night. I was valeting cars. I was dead tired. This is probably 3 months into this whole thing. And I'm exhausted. And this guy comes up, and he's driving a brand new white Lexus GS 350 F Sport with camel colored interior, had all the options on it. And he tipped me $10 as soon as he got out of the car. So I parked him in VIP, and it was raining and it was cold. And I sat inside of the car, and it was a moment where, have you ever had that moment where you know the possibility, but the reality of your situation makes the possibility seem so far away that it is almost inachievable? And I was sitting in the car and I was like, I see this is tangible, and it's the byproduct of something that this guy did. And I feel like I'm busting my ass, working as hard as I can, but this feels like it is a million miles away. I know it's possible, but it feels impossible. And I think if any of us have ever tried at something hard enough or long enough, we've had that experience where we sit there and we go like, I know this is possible, but it feels like it is a million miles away. And so I came back to the office the next day and I printed out a picture of that car. And I stapled that shit straight into the sheetrock above the door, above the desk. And I was like, I am going to make it happen. And so I started doing this and I started doing this. Well, guess what? At the end of that year, I did 6 million in volume. And then in January, I went and I bought a brand new white Lexus GS 350 S Sport with a camel color interior with all the options. Had 13 miles on it. And that was the first time in my life that I had in brilliant, vivid color that even if something is seemingly impossible, that with the right direction and hard enough work, you can make it a reality. So that was the first thing that started the catalyst of saying, well, if I could do that, going from in 2 years getting my car repossessed to walking off the lot with a brand spanking new one with 10 miles on it. And what else is possible? And so then the next year I did 7.4 million in closed volume. And then I bought a house. And then I got all the things that were the byproducts of success. I had 3 custom suits. I bought 3 laptops. I don't even know where 2 of the 3 went. Don't even ask me. I don't know where they are. No clue. I bought iPads, iPhones, everything you can think of. I spent $100,000 on furniture for my house just because I could, right? Because I grew up, a little background. When we were growing up, we were almost in a homeless position when I was a kid. My dad left when I was 4 years old and left my mom, who's a stay-at-home mom, with a house and 2 kids. I was 4 and my brother was 2. And for 6 months, we had a for sale sign in front of our house. And every single day that we came home, there was a question mark over the roof of that house going like, is this somewhere that we're going to be able to stay tonight? And that entire time, we had no idea what the future held. And we kept looking at the reality of ending up in a shelter should something happen to the house. And even after we got a little bit of housing stability, the first time I ever got clothes from an actual store was when I was a freshman in high school. And I remember being fascinated by the whole concept of actually shopping in a traditional store because my entire life had been nothing but hand-me-downs and black garbage bags full of clothes. And so in my world, we had 2 options. You either had a design that you thought was really cool and it fit horribly, or you had something that fit really well that was ugly as shit. And the combination of going into an actual store and being able to have multiple options, like, oh, I like that design and I can pick the size, that is like mind-blowing to me. And that was the first time that I had ever seen that was in a high school. I was a freshman in high school the first time I even got clothes from a shelf. So naturally what happened was that when I was trying to get myself out of this hole and trying to motivate myself to be successful in real estate, my only training had been shooting for the things that were the byproducts of success. So when I had the ability to buy custom furniture and do all this other shit and get custom suits and buy laptops and all these things, I went ham and I did it. But something incredible happened the next year, which is truly the catalyst of this entire class. Because I started planning for the next year. I was like, well, I did 6 million, 7 million. So the next year I'm going to do like 8. And then I was like, you know what? I want to set a big goal because clearly I can achieve whatever the hell I put my mind to. So why don't I do 9 this year? So I was like, yeah, let's do 9. And I will never forget it. But I was sitting in my house in January and I was trying to psych myself up. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to do 9 million this year. And it was like trying to get a sailboat to go fast with no wind. Because I was evaluating my situation, I was realizing I am sitting in this $500,000 house with a $60,000 car, all the custom furniture you could ever want, all these custom suits, I'm on these laptops, I'm with a brand new phone, I have all these things that are the byproducts of success with none of the internal feeling of success. And so one of the most powerful things that happen in our lives, and the biggest question I can ask, is what happens when you accomplish a goal and the accomplishment doesn't feel like what you thought it would feel like? Have you ever been there before? Have you ever gotten to a goal that you set out for And you're like, man, when this happens, I'm just going to be so happy. I'm going to be great. And then you get there and it doesn't feel the way that you thought it would feel. Whether you're religious or not, it's a great story. There's a story in the Bible where they're out on the sea, and there's this huge storm raging, and there's just all this just crazy things going on. And everybody on board the ship was looking at the dry land and saying, man, if we can just get back to dry land, we're just going to dance and have a party and like, just get me off of this boat, get me out of here. We are going to throw a party when we are back on dry land. And finally they got back to dry land. And as soon as their feet hit the land, all of them collapsed down and started crying. It wasn't the party that they thought, because sometimes the accomplishing of a goal doesn't feel like what we thought it would feel like. Then what? So I'm sitting in this house and I'm surrounded by all these things that are the byproducts of success, but it didn't feel like what I thought it was going to feel like. And I ended up doing 3.8 million in that next year, which is a pretty tough slide from doing 7 million the first year, and clearly basing your lifestyle off of doing 7 million in volume. And that's when I realized that I had a false why. And the problem is, too many people get into this business and they fill their heads with all these, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And while these things can give you motivation for a short period of time, remember the first analogy, you can build a structure that looks great, but once you start applying pressure to it, that's when you can really tell if it has a foundation or not. And when pressure started mounting on my business, and the pressure to succeed, and the pressure to stay up where I had been, and the pressure to do more because I'd done more all the other years before, when that pressure started coming on top of it, all of a sudden I realized that the entire structure was crumbling because there was no foundation. And so I had to go completely back to the drawing board and figure out, why in the hell am I doing this in the first place? Because what I realized is that when I went back to my entire childhood and everything that I had been through, some of the happiest days of my life had nothing to do with our financial position. So when people tell you, oh, money doesn't buy happiness, sure, it can buy stability and it can buy comfort. But ask anybody who is trying to pin their happiness on the financial, and they will tell you financial does not bring happiness or fulfillment. And that's what I find most times when we go through these exercises and I ask people, I said, well, why are you doing this? One of the first things out of their mouth, oh, financial freedom. Why'd you get into real estate? There's no ceiling to my income. Yeah, well, guess what? There's also no floor. Okay? Yeah, there may not be an income, but there sure as hell in the floor, right? You can make a negative in this business. Trust me, living proof. So I just ended up in a space where I realized that all the things that I was shooting for, I had achieved. But remember when I told you that achievements are not success? Achievements are the byproducts of the road to success. So I had to go back to the drawing board and I was like, why am I doing this in the first place? And I was like, where is there any motivation for me to do this? And that's when I came back to this. And that's where this whole course was developed from, is because I realized that you can be successful and not have a why, but it's going to limit your ceiling, because the second pressure starts mounting and the second you need to get to that next level, it's going to feel like you're trying to drive a sailboat with no wind. So let's talk a little bit more about your big why. Why are we talking about all this background anyways? Because you have to realize that you're going to have to, if I just started into this and just said, hey, let's talk about our big why. What do you think your big why is? What do you think your big why is? What are some examples of some good big whys? It completely negates the byproduct of what this is all about, which is the fact that your big why, like we said at the beginning, starts in your subconscious, and it starts with these backstories. It starts with your story. Your story, your byproduct of where you've been, your story, that is going to be the power to figure out your why. So we have to talk about this first to even get to a place that we can talk about your why. Because in the absence of it, we can build a great big structure, but as soon as there's any pressure, it's going to collapse. Because the pain that you've gone through in your life, that becomes the always renewable source of power.
You know what I heard? Totally tangible.
Yeah.
Is when you have the courage to tell your story and be vulnerable, you own that story, it becomes your superpower.
Amen. Amen. Did y'all hear that? She said, when you own your story, when you have courage and you own your story, it becomes your superpower.
And you say it out loud and tell it to people.
Absolutely. And you say that loud and you tell it to people. That's part of why I love teaching this. And that's part of why, you know, several of you have been in my Ignite classes. This is why I bring it up in all my Ignite classes. It's because it's fundamental, but more than that is because it is a constant reminder that this story, this is my power. The moment you realize that your story is not just for you, but that your story is for other people, then you can start to harness the power of this. And that's something that Bob Kalinske told me. I had lunch with Bob Kalinske a couple of years ago, and we were at lunch, and he told me, he said, you've got such a great story, but it's not going to serve you any good until you realize that the power of your story is going to come from sharing it with other people. Your story is not your prison, folks. Your story is your power. And that pain and that story, all those things that you've accrued in your life, that becomes the always renewable source of power for your why. So let's jump into that. Get a separate piece of paper from all the notes that we've been taking, a totally separate, clean piece of paper. Okay, at the top of that piece of paper, I want you to write why. Just one why, just why. Write why. And underneath it, I want you to write why you're doing this. Just fire off the hip. You don't have to think too deep into it, because trust me, we'll get into that. Or rather, you will get into that. But just write down why you're doing this. Why did you get into this? Why are you doing what you're doing? So take a quick second and write that down. Now, once you've kind of written down why, and now I'm seeing, because it's the first time I've taught this class specifically, I see I need to extend this class by about 30 minutes, because we're getting down towards the end. So now I know now that this has to be a 2.5-hour class, not just a 2-hour. But because normally what I would want to do is go through and say, let's give some examples. Talk to me about what your whys are, and then we can kind of break them down a little bit. So I don't think we have quite enough time to do that right now, but I'm going to try to give you as much guidance as I can to help you with doing this project. Okay? So you're going to look at your why that you wrote down, and underneath that, I want you to write why again. Just write why underneath it. Skip a couple of pages or a couple of spaces. Why? Now, what I want you to do is reference back to the why that you wrote down first and ask why. So for example, like the one that I hear all the freaking time. Why did you get into real estate? Why did you do this? Because I want financial freedom. I want to be able to control my own schedule. I want to be able to be my own boss. I guarantee you, several of you have that written down. Some version of it. Because it's something that I hear all the time. Look, I have been doing this for quite some time now, and I have been digging into whys for a while. So I know that these are the standard operating ones. It's like you're born and it's like, oh, why do you get into this business? Oh, here you go. Here's a postcard. Financial freedom, be my own boss, and I want to make my own schedule. Okay, so underneath that, right, why? So why is that important to you? Let's start personalizing this, right? Because people get into real estate because of financial freedom, because they want their schedule and they want to be their own boss. That's great. That's universal. But remember, I said I want to figure out, what does success look like to you, not globally, personally. So why, on a personal level, are those things important to you? Why do you want to accomplish those things? Why are those things part of your why? Okay. Then underneath that, spoiler alert, I want you to write why again. And I want you to do this 7 times. 7 times. Why? Continue to take your responses and dig them out and say, why is that important? Why is that powerful? Why does that matter? Okay. Now I want you to flip back to the notes that we've been taking in the class, because I'm going to help you along here a little bit. There are 4 things that you have to realize and refer back to when you are going on this exercise of your 7 levels of why. Why? Okay. There are four things. Okay. And this is about the time that you need them, because about the 3rd or 4th level of why is when you start getting pissed off. What do you mean why? That is my why. I've why'd it to the point that it can't be unwhy'd anymore. The why is the why is the why. That is my why. Wrong. So here's 4 things to help you break that down a little bit more. Okay. 1, realize there is a difference between a reason and a why. There is a difference between a reason and a why. Almost all of you have written reasons as your whys.
Can you provide an example?
Absolutely. You know I can. So just write that down. There is a difference between a reason and a why. Okay. So a great example of this was, we all remember when the I almost said AirPods. That's not right. The iPod came out, right? Apple released the iPod. This is a great example that's used in Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, which is a phenomenal book. If you have not read it, I would highly encourage you to read it. Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It's a great example he uses. And he said, Apple became a technology company because they wanted to change the face of technology. Up until Apple, all these technology companies dealt with backroom servers, giant things, all these things that were made for companies and big tech and all these different things. Nothing was designed for the consumer, the individual. Apple was the very first company that came out and wanted to make technology personal, right? They had a clear why. Their why they were doing this was because they wanted to make technology for the average person. All of their advertising, everything they did supported their why. We all remember the iPod ads where they were the black silhouettes with the white headphones, right? Everybody remembers that, with them holding the little white iPods that look like bricks now, but the little white iPods and the things going out of their ears, the headphones, right? Their whole why was that they wanted to make technology fun and young and achievable and approachable for everybody, not just this backroom shit that's always been. So what happened, Microsoft came out shortly thereafter with an MP3 player that had more storage, could play more songs, had a better refresh rate, better headphones than the iPod did. And they failed miserably because Apple had a why behind their products. Apple knew why they were making their products. They had a clear vision of why they were doing it. Microsoft had reasons why they were doing it. Microsoft's reasons were, oh, well, we want to make a great product. It's a reason. We want to build a bigger storage capacity than the iPod. That's a reason. We want to take some of their market share. That's a reason. But guess what? They didn't have a why. And they failed miserably. They sold like a few thousand units of that product. And the damning part is, it was a better product. But it didn't matter. There's a difference between a reason and a why. Too many people give reasons.
It's kind of like business, and this prompted me to remember Apple's
Mhm.
kind of big why, but
Yeah.
their mission statement.
100%.
And they are dedicated to the empowerment of man, to making personal computing accessible to each and every individual, so to help change the way we think, work, learn, and communicate.
Exactly.
It's big.
It's huge. And it's infinitely scalable. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. But the second thing, if your why is accomplishable, it's a goal, not a why. Somebody told me, one of the people that I've done this exercise with, they said, well, really, my big why is that I really want to bring my whole family out of poverty. And I said, that's awesome, but you realize that's a goal because it's accomplishable. If your why, if you write something down that is reasonably accomplishable, it's not a why, it's a goal. Are you starting to see that maybe figuring out your why might be a little bit more difficult than you originally thought it was? Your why can't be something that you can tick off on a box. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see, second to people giving reasons. It's because they have whys that expire. So ask yourself, can this why, can my why, can that expire? Can that be accomplished? If it is, it's a goal, it's not a why. 3, if you find yourself in this constant search for just productivity, and your why is starting to resemble something that's just like, I just want to be productive at a high level, I find that an aimless search for productivity is a direct link to the lack of purpose. If you are aimlessly searching for productivity, the likelihood is that you don't have a strong enough purpose. So the example of that is I was talking to one of the ladies that attended one of my classes a couple of months ago. And we were talking about this, and she was like, well, I want to do this. And we started breaking down her why. And I was challenging her on her whys. And I was like, look, why is this? Why is that? And she was like, well, I want to do this, but I also have my cosmetology license. Well, I also do massage therapy. Well, I also do this. Well, I also do that. Well, I also do that. And I told her, I said, just pause all that. I said, you realize none of this has any correlation with each other, right? And she was like, yeah, but I'm just not sure 100% what I want to do. I said, the problem is that you are searching aimlessly for just the feeling of productivity because there is a latent lack of purpose in your life. And that is a tough thing to face. And what we came to was that her kids had just recently left the nest. She had 3 kids that she had very young. And all of a sudden they all went to college and they all went off and they all moved out. And all of a sudden she realized she was searching with a lack of purpose. And so she was aimlessly searching for just the feeling of productivity to fill the void of a lack of purpose. So evaluate when you're going through this why. Are you really just searching for just productivity and just the feeling of movement? Because if so, you may need to address your purpose. And for the last thing, your why is allowed to be kind of selfish. I'm giving you permission. Your why is allowed to be a little selfish. And in addition to that, let me just tell you that I find, like I said, having asked this question probably about 4,000 times at this point, let me just tell you, the likelihood is, if you have children, your kids may not be your why. Pretty much every single mom that I've talked to who has kids, and I ask them what their big why is, their immediate answer is, oh, my kids. Let's strip that down a little bit. That may not be the true case. Your why is allowed to be selfish. And let me give you an example. There was one woman who was in here and she was sitting in that chair right there. And she said, oh, my kids are my big why. And I said, okay, well, how are you not able to really dig into this? She'd been doing it for almost 1.5 years and it only closed like 3 deals. And she said, well, I just can't really figure it out. I said, are you hosting open houses? No, I can't host open houses. Why can you not host open houses? Because my husband wants me to be home on the weekends. I said, okay, have you not told him that you can't be home on the weekends because you had to go do these open houses? Well, no, he doesn't understand that. So the whole reason your entire family is looking back at you when you say these things is because nobody understands why you're doing this in the first place. Her husband made over $300,000 a year. Her why was not her kids. Because a why, especially if it's your kids, but your why overall needs to be so important and so impactful that if you choose not to do something, the lives of somebody else is different because of your decision not to act. For my mom, at the time, her kids, me and my brother, we were her why. Because the only job she could get that would keep her on the same schedule as me and my brother was teaching high school. And so what she did is she taught kindergarten during the day in Marietta and drove from Marietta to University of West Georgia in Carrollton for night classes, 120-mile round trip journey, teach during the day, went to school in the afternoon for 3.5 years. You want to talk about grit? And the reason me and my brother were her why was because if she decided one day that she didn't want to go to school, which I'm sure she felt, that she didn't want to get up, she didn't want to do that project, she didn't want to do all these things, the lives of me and my brother would have been completely different because of her decision not to do it. So now let me ask you again. Let's filter back through your why when you're doing this. If you choose not to do something, are the lives of somebody else going to be different? If nobody's life is impacted by your why and your decision not to do this, you haven't found your why yet. You owe it to yourself Your why can be a little bit selfish, because guess what? Your whole family, you want to better your family, better yourself first. If you want to be better for your family, better yourself first. You need to figure out why you're doing this and why it's important to you so that you can be the best version of yourself so that you can impact the lives of others. And I know we've only got like 5 minutes left, but the last question I always get is, okay, well, what's your why? So glad you asked. My why, after going through this process and going through all this, I had to strip everything away and figure out, why am I doing this in the first place? What is this important to me, right? And I realized that my why, and by the way, I tell all of my clients my why. I don't go into as much detail as I'm about to, but I tell every single one of my clients my why. Because I always tell them, I said, anytime you choose to invest in a company, I think it's always important to know why that company is around. So let me tell you why I'm in this business. And I tell them because when I was a kid, we were almost in a homeless position. I know what it feels like to have the insecurity of a house. I know firsthand what it feels like to come home and not be sure if you can actually stay there. I know what that feels like. And to me, it doesn't matter if my clients know what that feels like. Most people won't know what that feels like, but that doesn't matter because I do. So part of my why being in real estate is because I get so much personal fulfillment out of seeing my clients go into a house that they don't need to worry about, that they can call their own, that they have a place, they have a sense of permanence in their life. And the other reason is because real estate is a phenomenal platform. And in my opinion, it is one of the greatest entrepreneurial platforms that is available to us in the world, and especially in our country, because it is a platform. I use real estate as my platform to fulfill out all of my whys. So the other one being, a lot of you know that I serve on the board of directors for an organization called Must Ministries. We specialize in homeless rehabilitation and food insecurity. Part of why I work so hard is because a portion of every single commission check that I make goes directly to Must Ministries. Because it is my opportunity to, in effect, reach back in time. Because when I go to our facilities and I go see these people, I'm handing out food boxes to families that come in there. And every now and then I'll see a family come in and it's a single mom and 2 kids. And it looks like I am reaching back in time and helping me and my mom and my brother in a time that I couldn't help. And I'm given that ability because of the platform that I have here. It enables me to reach back in time and help in a position that I was helpless. And then the other thing is making the most of the time that I have with my mom. Because she gave everything for me and my brother. Everything. And so my goal is to turn around and use my platform, use this platform that I have to make her life as good as I possibly can while I have her. 2 summers ago, I took her out west and we went to go see national parks, and we were standing in Glacier National Park, and we were on top of this mountain, and we were looking across at all of these incredible mountains in the Rocky Mountain Range. And I turned around and she was crying, and I asked her, I was like, why are you crying? And she looked at me and she said, I had gotten to a point in my life that I never thought I would see any of this. Remember the timeline of the people around you. Time is finite. What are you going to do with it? Why are you here? And who is going to benefit from you being here? And last but not least, this gives me the platform to turn around and help other people. Because like I said earlier, I've been through this. I've done all this. I've had to struggle through all this. My life is a very long, twisted line to get here, but I've been through all of it. And my job, I feel, is my duty to use this story to turn around and help other people see that if it is possible for me, it is possible for you. People sometimes try to make out like I am some really incredible, exceptional person, and I'm not. By trying to pretend like I am exceptional gets you off the hook. We're just exactly the same. I just know why I'm here. So your homework is to go through that 7 why, go through all this, refer back to everything that's on here, and figure out what your why is. And let me tell you, if you can talk about your why and you don't even feel close to getting choked up, you're not at your why yet. When you talk about your why and you tell somebody your why and you really tell them and you start to get choked up and you can't do it. I've told my why 150,000 times at this point, and I still cannot get through it without getting choked up at some point because it is so important. You have got to find that in your life. And when you go through this process and you do ultimately find your why, next step of the homework is I want you to tell me. Because I want to know why you're doing it. Okay. Well, I have an ALC meeting to attend that I think I'm already 2 minutes late for. But thank you guys. This is awesome. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very easy to find. So thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
You're
Awesome.
very welcome. Absolutely. My pleasure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Pastor Eric.
Pastor Eric. I like that. That has a good ring to it. I might hang on to that.
I thought that myself, my friend. I thought that myself. I've seen your journey.
Thank
All
you
right,
so
take
much.
care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome.